The morning they came to arrest her, Mia was making rice porridge. Not because anyone had asked her to, not because it was on her schedule. She had been making it every morning for 3 years at exactly 5:45 because the man she worked for had a stomach condition that flared when he skipped breakfast, and he always skipped breakfast when he was stressed, and he was always stressed. She stirred the pot with the same quiet focus she brought to everything. She did not look up when she heard the door open. She did not flinch when she heard the boots.
There were 6 of them.
She knew because she counted the footsteps. One of the officers said her name. She turned off the stove first. Then she wiped her hands on her apron. Then she looked at him. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply untied the apron, folded it once, and placed it on the counter beside the pot, as if she would be back to finish it.
She would not be back.
Not for a long time. The man she cooked for was Junho. He was 44 years old, blind in both eyes since an incident he never discussed, and the acknowledged head of a criminal organization that controlled significant portions of the wholesale fish market, 2 freight logistics companies, and a number of other businesses that looked legitimate and mostly were not. He was feared in ways that were specific and earned. He did not threaten people often because he did not need to. People who worked for him understood, through a kind of accumulated pressure, what the boundaries were. Mia had worked in that house for 3 years and had never once seen him raise his voice. That made him harder to read, not easier. She was taken to a processing facility in the southern part of the city and held for 48 hours before formal charges were filed. The charge was obstruction of justice, related to an ongoing financial investigation into Junho's organization. The prosecutors believed she had knowledge of account transfers, shell company registrations, and at least one destroyed document. The evidence against her was modest, but not nothing. Someone had been feeding information to the investigation, and that information had abruptly stopped. Mia was the last person with access to the relevant materials before they disappeared. She sat through 2 days of questioning without a lawyer present, which was her right to refuse and which she exercised. She answered some questions and not others. She was not rude. She was not emotional. She simply drew a line, invisible but firm, and did not cross it, and the investigators could not figure out where exactly the line was, or why she had drawn it there. On the 3rd morning, a lawyer arrived. He was not the kind of lawyer Mia could afford. He was the kind of lawyer Junho could afford, which meant he wore a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent and carried a briefcase that he never opened. He sat down across from her, looked at her for a long moment, and said that his client wished her to know that her position was being taken very seriously. Mia looked at the briefcase, then at the lawyer. Then she said she did not need his help. The lawyer blinked. That was not a response he had prepared for. She said it again calmly. She said she appreciated the gesture, but she would handle her own defense. She said she had spoken to a legal aid office and someone would be in touch. The lawyer sat with this for a moment, then stood, thanked her for her time, and left. He looked, briefly, like a man who had just been handed a problem he didn't know how to put down. That afternoon, Junho was told that his housekeeper had refused his lawyer. He was sitting in the main room of his house when he received this information, in the chair he always sat in, near the window he couldn't see through. The man who told him was named Seo, his most senior assistant, who had been with him for 11 years and had learned to read the quality of Junho's silences the way a sailor reads the texture of water. Junho did not respond immediately. He turned the information over. Mia had been in his employment for 3 years. She had come through a reference, had passed a background check that Junho's people conducted themselves, and which was considerably more thorough than anything a government agency would perform. She had no known affiliations, no significant debts, no obvious pressure points. She cooked. She managed the house. She was quiet in a way that did not feel like hiding, or so it had seemed. He asked Seo what Mia had said to the investigators. Seo said she had answered questions about the household schedule, about deliveries and routines, and had declined to answer questions about documents or financial records. Junho asked what she had said about the documents specifically. Seo said she had said nothing. Not that she didn't know. Not that there were no documents. She had simply stopped talking at that point and waited. Junho was quiet for a long time. Then he said that she was protecting something. Seo agreed that it appeared so.
Junho asked what.
Neither of them answered that. The trial, if it could be called that, was brief. The evidence was circumstantial and thin. Mia's legal aid attorney, a young woman named Park Ji-yeon who had graduated 3 years earlier and taken on the case with the particular focused hunger of someone trying to prove something to themselves, argued successfully that the prosecution could not demonstrate Mia had direct knowledge of the materials in question. The charge was reduced. Mia was sentenced to 18 months for a lesser obstruction count. She accepted the sentence without visible reaction. Ji-yeon, who had expected at least some sign of relief at the reduction, found this unsettling. Most people, when they hear a sentence, even a good one, show something on their face. Mia showed nothing. She nodded once, as if someone had confirmed an appointment, and asked about the processing timeline. She was sent to a minimum security facility an hour outside the city. She was a model prisoner, in the way that people are model prisoners when they have decided to simply pass through a situation rather than resist it. She did not make friends, but she was not unfriendly. She did not cause problems. She worked in the facility kitchen, which seemed either like a coincidence or like an inevitability, depending on how you looked at it. Back in the city, in the house near the hill, things changed. Junho hired a replacement. Then another. The first lasted 2 weeks before she was let go for reasons that were never fully explained, but seemed to involve the temperature of soup. The second lasted slightly longer. The third, a man this time, lasted almost a month before Seo quietly informed him that his services were no longer needed. It was not that the food was bad, exactly. It was that something was missing. The house ran differently. Junho is not a man who would admit to missing a housekeeper, and no one in his orbit would suggest such a thing to his face. But the household had a rhythm when Mia was there, and that rhythm was gone, and the absence of it made the house feel slightly less controlled, which made Junho slightly less controlled, which made everyone around him slightly more careful. Seo noticed something else. Junho had started sleeping less. He had always been a light sleeper. The blindness had heightened his other senses and made rest difficult in busy environments. But now he was waking earlier than usual, sometimes before 4 in the morning, and sitting in the kitchen in the dark, which was not dark to him, waiting for something that was not coming. 6 months into Mia's sentence, something arrived at the house. It came through a legal channel, which was itself strange. A sealed envelope, addressed to Junho directly, hand-delivered by a courier who worked for a law firm that had no known connection to Junho's organization. Inside was a single photograph, printed on standard paper, showing a child. The child appeared to be around 2 years old. He was sitting in what looked like a small room, on a clean floor, holding something. His eyes were clear and dark and specific in the way that eyes are when a face is still becoming itself. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. For words. He is doing well. No sender. No return address. No explanation. Seo watched Junho hold the photograph. He watched Junho's fingers trace the edges of it. He had never seen Junho touch anything that way, not documents, not objects, not anything. After a long time, Junho asked if Seo had seen the photograph. Seo said he had. Junho asked if Seo understood what it meant. Seo said he thought he might. Junho said nothing more. He folded the photograph carefully, twice, and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He left his hand there for a moment, flat against his chest, before he moved it. What Seo understood, or thought he understood, was this. The child in the photograph had Junho's jaw. He had Junho's forehead. He had the particular set of the eyes that Junho had before the blindness, in photographs from before, which Seo had seen in a box once, and never mentioned. What Seo did not yet understand was what this had to do with Mia. That answer came slowly, the way answers do when the person who holds them has decided to release them on her own terms. Ji-yeon, the young lawyer who had represented Mia at trial, visited her at the facility 3 months into the sentence. It was not a legal visit. Ji-yeon came on a personal day, signed in as a visitor, and sat across from Mia in a room with plastic chairs and a window that had wire running through the glass. Ji-yeon told Mia that she had been thinking about the case. Specifically about the documents. Specifically about the timing of their disappearance. She had come to a theory, she said, and she wanted to ask Mia about it. Not for legal purposes. Just because it was bothering her. Mia looked at her for a moment, then looked at the table. Junho said she thought the documents Mia had destroyed or hidden were not financial records. She thought they were something personal. She thought Mia had found something in the course of her work in that house, something she was not supposed to find, and had made a decision about what to do with it. Mia said nothing. Junho said she thought the decision had cost Mia considerably, and she wasn't sure Mia fully understood why she had made it. Mia looked up then. She studied Junho's face for a moment. Then she said that Junho was too smart for the salary she was making and should consider private practice. Junho almost smiled. Mia said she was fine. She said she would be home. She paused at the word home, briefly. She said she would be back in a year, probably less with good behavior. She said there were things that needed time to settle, and this was the time for settling. Junho asked if Junho knew. Mia said not yet. That visit was the last for several months. Then 8 months into the sentence, 2 things happened in the same week. The first was that Junho's organization came under pressure from a rival group that had been expanding its footprint in the freight sector. This was not a new conflict, but it had become acute, and Junho spent several consecutive days in meetings that CEO described later as the most tense he had witnessed in 11 years. The resolution, when it came, involved certain concessions that Junho accepted without appearing to accept, which was a skill particular to him, and which unsettled the other side in the way it always unsettled people when Junho seemed to agree to something. The second was a phone call. It came to Junho's private line, which very few people had. The caller was a woman, older, who identified herself as the manager of a care facility in a district of the city that Junho had no known connections to. She said she was calling because she had a child in her care, a boy, just under 3 years old, whose documentation listed Junho as an emergency contact. She said she was calling because the previous contact, a woman who had been making regular payments and visits, was no longer available, and the child needed to know his arrangements were secure. Junho asked who the previous contact was. The woman said her name was Mia. The room, as CEO described it later, became very still. Junho asked a series of questions in a voice that was completely controlled. How long had the boy been there? What his name was? What condition he was in? Whether he was well? The manager answered each one carefully, as if aware she was speaking to someone who required precision. The boy had been there since he was 5 months old. His name was Junho, not exactly. His name was June, but the care facility had logged it as Junho in their system from the paperwork. He was healthy. He was doing very well, actually. Junho asked when Mia had last visited. The manager said the last visit was the day before Mia's arrest. After the call ended, Junho sat in the chair by the window for a long time. CEO waited. He had learned over 11 years that Junho's long silences were not empty. They were full of processing, of the kind of calculation that took time because it mattered. Eventually, Junho asked CEO to find out everything about the care facility. Not in a threatening way. Just everything. Then he asked CEO to find out how someone becomes the emergency contact for a child without the knowledge of the biological father. CEO said he would look into it. Junho said to be thorough. What CEO found, over the following 2 days, was a careful and quietly constructed arrangement. Mia had placed the child at the facility when he was 5 months old using paperwork that listed her as the primary guardian and Junho, not by name, but by a designation that pointed to him as the emergency secondary. The payments had been made through a separate account that Mia had opened under her own name before she began working at the house. The account had been funded incrementally, in small amounts, over the preceding months from savings. She had planned this before she was employed there, or near enough to before that the timing was deliberate, which meant she had known about the child before she took the job, which meant she had taken the job for a specific reason, which meant that 3 years of quiet mornings and rice porridge and careful household management had been, at least in part, something else entirely. Junho asked CEO to say it plainly. CEO said it seemed possible that Mia had taken the position in order to be close to the child's father. To observe. To decide.
Junho asked decide what?
CEO said he wasn't sure. Whether he was safe, perhaps. whether the child would be safe. Junho did not respond to that. What followed was a period of about 6 weeks during which Junho did something that was, for him, unusual. He asked questions. Not through intermediaries, not through CO, but directly. He called the care facility himself, twice. He asked about the boy's routine, his temperament, what he liked to eat. The manager, a practical woman who had seen many unusual situations in her career, answered all of these questions without comment. She mentioned once that June was very calm for his age, that he didn't cry easily, that he had a habit of watching people for a long time before he warmed to them. Junho said he understood. He visited the facility on a Tuesday in late autumn. He came with CO and one other person, no more. The manager met them at the entrance and walked them through the facility without ceremony. She was not nervous, which Junho noticed. Most people became slightly nervous around him. She was simply professional, and this quality, in its own way, earned his respect. They brought him to a small indoor play area. The boy was there with 2 other children. He was sitting on the floor, as in the photograph, but now older, sturdier. He had a small wooden block in each hand. He looked up when they came in. He did not react to Junho the way children sometimes react to strangers, with wariness or tears, or the instinct to retreat. He looked at Junho for a long time. Then he held up one of the blocks. Junho couldn't see it, but CO said later that he thought Junho somehow knew. He turned toward the boy at the right moment, angled himself correctly. He crouched down, slowly, and extended one hand. The boy placed the block in it. They stayed for 40 minutes. On the drive back, Junho did not speak. CO did not speak either. There are some silences that are full enough that filling them feels like a mistake. 3 months later, Mia was released early for good behavior. She was picked up at the facility gate by Junho, who had come on her own initiative, which Mia noticed. In the car, Junho told her that Junho knew. Mia looked out the window and said she knew he would find out eventually. Junho asked if that had been part of the plan. Mia thought about this for a moment. She said it was more like she had needed things to happen in a certain order. She had needed time for Junho to be without her before he found out about June. She had needed him to experience the absence before he understood what the absence had been protecting. Junho said she didn't fully understand that. Mia said that was all right. What Mia understood, and had understood for longer than anyone else in the story, was the specific shape of Junho's danger. She had spent time, before she ever took the job, learning what she could about him. Not from police records or from the kind of intelligence his rivals gathered, but from the people who moved at the edges of his world, drivers, suppliers, former staff. She had listened to the way people described him. Not what he did, but how he did it. The precision. The patience. The particular way he trusted people, which was slowly and almost never, and the way that trust, once given, was absolute until it wasn't, and then the person was simply gone from his world, quietly, without drama. She had also learned about the woman who had been with him before. The boy's mother. A woman named Yuna, who had left the city when she was 4 months pregnant, who had told no one, who had sent Mia, her cousin, a message 2 months before she died in an accident in a city far to the north. The message had said there was a child. The message had said she didn't know what kind of life Junho would give him. The message had said she trusted Mia to figure it out. Mia had never told the investigators this. She had never told Junho. She had told no one. She had taken a job in the house of a dangerous man whose child she was secretly raising and spent 3 years watching him, learning whether the person Yuna had been afraid of was the whole truth or part of it. Whether there was a version of Junho who could be trusted with this. The documents she had destroyed were Yuna's last communications, forwarded through a channel that had briefly touched Junho's network and which, if found by the investigators, would have pulled the whole arrangement into legal chaos and placed June in a state care system that had no obligation to consult Junho or Mia or anyone else. She had gone to prison to prevent that. She had accepted the sentence to buy time. She had sent the photograph because she had decided, by that point, that the answer to her question was yes, that there was a version of Junho who could hold this. She had drawn that conclusion not from any single moment, but from 3 years of small observations. The way he remembered the names of delivery people after hearing them once. The way he gave staff time when their families had emergencies without being asked. The way he sat in the kitchen sometimes in the early morning when the house was quiet, not doing anything, just existing in the space, and how the space felt different when he was in it, less like a house that was owned and more like a house that was inhabited. None of this made him safe, exactly. She was not naive about what he was. But it made him possible. When Junho dropped her at a small apartment she had arranged before her imprisonment, Mia sat for a while in the empty rooms. The apartment was clean. There was nothing in it yet. She had organized this remotely through Junho, and it was functional and bare in the way that organized places are when they haven't been lived in yet. Her phone had a single message on it from a number she didn't recognize. The message was 2 sentences. It said the care facility had confirmed her release. It said that whenever she was ready, he would like to speak. She put the phone down on the kitchen counter. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to find a grocery store because there was no food in the apartment and she was, among other things, very hungry. She did not go to the house on the hill that day. Or the next. She spent 4 days in the apartment, reorienting. She walked through the city. She visited Junho at the facility and spent 2 hours with him, and he climbed into her lap and fell asleep while she was talking to the manager, which was something he had done since he was very small. She sat with his weight against her and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a long time, but on the 5th day, she called the number. Junho answered on the 2nd ring. He said her name once and waited. She asked how he was. He said he was getting by. He said the cooking situation had not improved.
She almost laughed.
She did not expect that from him, and she realized that she should have expected it, that in 3 years she had been watching him carefully and still he could do something she hadn't anticipated. She asked about Junho. He said the boy was remarkable. He said this in a flat voice, as if it were simply a fact, which made it more affecting somehow than if he had said it with feeling. She said she knew. He said he had questions. She said she knew that too. He asked if she would come. She said she would come on Friday. There was a pause. He said that was 4 days away.
She said yes.
He said, all right. And that was the whole conversation. Friday morning, she arrived at the house on the hill at 8 o'clock. Seo opened the door, and his expression, which was professionally neutral at all times, shifted by a fraction that she recognized, something between relief and curiosity, which were not emotions she had ever associated with him but which made sense now. He stepped aside, and she came in. The house smelled the same. She had not expected it to affect her, but it did slightly. She stood in the entrance for a moment and then walked through to the kitchen. The kitchen had been used carelessly. Not dirty, exactly, but the kind of disorder that comes from people who are competent at many things, treating cooking as a problem to be solved rather than a thing to be done properly. She looked at it without judgment. She filled the kettle. She was making tea when Junho came in. She heard him before she saw him. The particular cadence of his walk, which she had catalogued without intending to, the slight pause before the threshold. He came in and stood near the table. He did not sit. She finished making the tea. She put a cup in front of him and one across from it for herself and sat down. He sat across from her. He said he would like her to tell him about Junho. She had prepared for this. She had thought, in the apartment over 4 days, about how much to say and in what order. She had decided to tell him plainly, without cushioning, because she had watched him for 3 years and she believed that plainness was what he could use. She told him about Junho. Not everything, not the parts that were only Junho's, that belonged to a person who was no longer present to give consent to their sharing. But the shape of it, that Junho had been afraid of what discovery would mean. That she had been afraid of what kind of life Junho would have in Junho's world. That she had trusted Mia because Mia was careful, and because Junho had known, maybe better than most people, what careful cost. Junho listened without interrupting. His hands were flat on the table. His face was still. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked one question. He asked why Mia had come herself, rather than sending word from somewhere safe. She said because she had needed to know if the word safe applied.
He took that in.
He did not say he was sorry about Junho. She had not expected him to. But she saw something shift in the line of his jaw, a tightening and then a release, and she understood what that was without needing to name it. He asked what she wanted. She said she wanted June to know his father. She said she wanted that to happen slowly and with sense. She said she wanted to be present for it because she was the person June knew and the transition needed to be steady. She said she was not asking him for anything for herself because she had managed this far without his help and would continue to manage.
He said he heard that.
He said he also heard what she hadn't said, which was that she was tired. 3 years of carrying this, and then 18 months in a facility, and then 4 days alone in an empty apartment.
He said he heard that.
She looked at him. She had not said any of that. He said he had a staff room. He said it was hers if she wanted it. He said the offer had no conditions and she could leave whenever she chose. He said he would not pretend that the last 3 years had been uncomplicated for either of them, and he would not pretend they were starting with a clean account. But he said he could use someone who cooked properly, and he said it in that flat, factual voice, and she recognized it as the closest thing to warmth he was able to offer without making himself vulnerable in a way that was foreign to him.
She said she would think about it.
She did not leave the house that day. She stayed through the afternoon, cleaning the kitchen first because it needed to be done. She made dinner, something simple. She set the table. Seo came in at some point and she gave him a plate and he ate it standing near the counter, which was how he always ate, and he said nothing, but before he left he said that the congee had been better when she made it, and she said she knew. June came to the house for the first time on a Sunday, 3 weeks later. He came with a bag that the facility manager had packed, containing his blanket and a set of wooden blocks and a small stuffed animal that was indistinguishable from a raccoon but which June called something else, and the manager had translated this as a bear, though neither of them was sure. Mia brought him in. He walked through the entrance in the way that small children walk into unfamiliar places, slowly, with their body tilted slightly forward, taking in information. He stopped in the main room and looked around. He looked at the chair by the window, which was Junho's chair, empty right now. Then Junho came in from the far end of the room. June watched him cross the room. He watched with the particular stillness he had, the watching before warming, as the facility manager had called it. Junho reached the center of the room and stopped. He turned, with the accuracy that came from years of navigating by sound and memory, toward June. He crouched down. He did not speak. He simply waited. June took 3 steps toward him. Then he stopped. He reached into his bag, he was holding it himself, which Mia had let him do, and removed one of the wooden blocks. He walked forward and placed it in Junho's outstretched hand. The same gesture, months apart, and the same gesture, as if the boy had stored it. Junho closed his hand around the block. He said for the first time June's name. Just the one syllable. Quiet and complete. Mia stood at the entrance to the room and watched this. Seo was somewhere behind her. The house was entirely still. She had been carrying this for 4.5 years. The weight of it had become so familiar that she had stopped feeling it as weight and had started feeling it simply as the shape of things, the way the world was. She had carried it through grief and through fear and through 1.5 years of a prison facility that smelled like industrial cleaning fluid and never went fully dark. She watched the boy with his father. She did not feel, at that moment, that it had been worth it in any simple accounting sense. Worth it implied a scale, and she had never been holding this on a scale. She had been holding it because it needed to be held, and she was the one who was there. That was a different thing entirely. What she felt was closer to relief, which is not the same as happiness, and not the same as safety, and not the same as resolution. It is its own specific state, the moment when a thing you have been holding is no longer held only by you. Junho sat on the floor. This was surprising. Mia had never seen him sit on a floor. He arranged himself cross-legged, which took a moment, and June watched this process with solemn interest. Then June sat down across from him, mirror-style, cross-legged, bag still in his lap. Junho held out his hand. In it was the block June had given him. He was offering it back. June considered this for a long time. Then he reached into his bag and got a second block and placed it alongside the first in Junho's hand. Both blocks. He patted Junho's hand once, the way small children sometimes pat hands to signal that something has been decided. Mia turned and walked into the kitchen. She did not need to see what came next because, What came next was not hers. She had delivered it over years at significant cost, and it was here now, and it belonged to other people. She stood at the counter. She looked at the window, which showed the hill and the sky above it, gray and still in late afternoon. She thought about Yuna. She thought about the message and how Yuna had said, "I trust you to figure it out." She thought about what a strange kind of trust that was. Not trust in a plan, not trust in a certainty, just trust in Mia's ability to navigate towards something she couldn't fully see yet. She reached for the kettle. From the main room, very quietly, she heard the sound of a small wooden block placed on a floor. Then another. She filled the kettle and turned it on and waited for the water to boil. The sound of blocks, slow and deliberate and patient, continued behind her. Two people learning the same language, without words, one block at a time. She did not go back in.
She made the tea.